The dates and times for all 17 Rams games has been released for the 2023 season. How difficult is the Rams schedule? That's coming up on Locked On Rams.
You are Locked On Rams, your daily Los Angeles Rams podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, Ramily? Thank you for making Locked On Rams your first listen every single day. Free and available wherever you get your podcasts. We are also available on YouTube. If you're new to the channel, be sure to hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, smash that like button, and most importantly, drop your Rams takes down below. Comment down below in the comment section. My name is Doug McCain. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at DMac_LA. You might know me from covering the Dodgers for Dodgers Nation, but I've been repping my Rams ever since they returned to LA. You know I'm loyal to the soil. And that man to your left is the Rams pre-half and post-game show host for ESPN's flagship station 710. He's entering his 8th year covering the team, the legend, Mr. Travis Rogers. Now, Trav, we finally got the schedule. We finally got the dates and the times for these games. Are you ready to get into it, my man?
I cannot wait. The week one can't get here fast enough. The game against the Seahawks, because we're going to turn around. It's going to be January and be like, when does it start all over again? Let's get going.
Exactly. We are hungry for football. And look, the NFL, they revealed that 2023 schedule on Thursday night. Now we finally know that the 17 opponents, but look, we already knew the opponents. Now it's about the times, the dates. And we're going to look at this first half of the schedule. And if you look at it, it is a gauntlet early on. You got back-to-back division games, first against the Seattle Seahawks on the road, and then at home against the San Francisco 49ers. Then you got the Bengals on the road. I finally did get one prediction right. I got the Bengals on that Monday Night Football game, so I'm feeling good about that. But Travis, the first half of the season, this is going to be a gauntlet. 3 of the 5 teams they play have the highest odds to win the Super Bowl, with the Eagles being the highest, the Bengals and the 49ers. I mean, there is a lot of tough teams. It almost feels like you're playing Street Fighter, but you're playing the bosses at the beginning. You're playing M. Bison and Saget and Vega. What is your takeaway, Travis, from this first part of the season?
Well, I think that the major takeaway is that the Rams may, in a very complicated and maybe not entirely satisfying way, might get exactly what they want. They may have been given a gift that was going to allow them to wind up where they wanted to. When you talk about roster construction, when you talk about their activity in free agency, when you talk about the fact that they didn't have a ton of high draft picks. And then yesterday we found out that they got a monster schedule right out of the gate. That you look at what they have, like you talked about, 3 of their first 4 games are on the road. You get a bunch of very good teams early. You get San Francisco early. You get Philadelphia early. Those are the 2 teams that were in the NFC Championship game a year ago. You get all 3 of your division opponents inside the first 6 weeks of the season. So they are being given something, and we can kind of go through this, but there's a scenario, and look, this is the NFL. No one's entirely sure what it's going to be until you start playing the games, but you don't have to squint too hard to look through the first half of the season, whether you want to call that the first 8 games of the year or the first 9 games of the year, and maybe only find a win or 2, maybe 3 along the way. And when we're talking about a team that is in transition, that is in the middle of perhaps rebuilding a championship caliber roster, a team that will have their first round draft pick again for the first time since 2016 in Jared Goff, this may be difficult to watch for a year, but it may ultimately be very good news.
Yeah, I think you can find the silver lining if everything goes as planned and they get that high draft pick at the end of the year. But if you are trying to win, this isn't good news if you're the Rams. It will feel like it could be over before it even gets started. I think there is a world where they could start 1-4. They could start 0-5. I mean, like you mentioned, you play all those tough teams early on. It's very front-loaded with elite competition. And, yeah, I mean, if you look at it compared to last year, I mean, this year is definitely going to be very tough. I mean, it's so difficult. And look, I mean, the one break they get is the Colts, and that's on the road in
Yep.
a 10 a.m. Pacific start. So, I mean, they aren't getting very many favors. And you look at all those playoff teams from last year, 3 of the first 4 games are on the road as well. Those 2 division opponents. So you could be one buried in the division and buried in the conference right out of the gates. Another thing I'm looking at too is you look at the skilled guys early on they're going to be facing. Guys like Lockett, Metcalf, Debo, Chase, Boyd, Higgins. I mean, for a secondary that's so inexperienced and with a defense that has been projected to be one of the worst in the league, hey, this offense better be high octane. They better score points if they want to win games early on. But yeah, it is definitely not very encouraging. And then you look at later in this schedule, you got a lot of road games. I mean, last year the Rams, they only had to travel for 7 road games, and one was at SoFi against the Chargers. They didn't have to travel. This year, you have 9 road trips, including 3 to the Eastern time zone, New York, Baltimore, and Cincinnati. Last year, they only had 1 in Tampa Bay. What do you just make of the travel in this schedule and just kind of how it lines up later?
Well, I think you look at this, and you mentioned it. They've got those 3 trips to the Eastern time zone. They have 5 games in that early window. So the NFL has the 10 a.m. Then we're talking West Coast time here. We got the 10 a.m. window. You got the 1 o'clock window. Those are the 2 things that most of the games are going to fall in those 2 spots. The 10 a.m. window is the window where you put a bunch of the games that maybe aren't that compelling to a wide audience, right? That maybe are not the marquee games. The marquee games are that 125 game. The marquee games are Sunday night, Monday night, and occasionally you'll get some on Thursday afternoon. The Rams are in that 10 o'clock window 5 times. You know how many times they were in it last year? Once. Here's what they were last year coming off they were a Super Bowl champion that everyone believed was going to be a pretty good team. They're not putting a team in that 10 o'clock window very often unless you think that you're not a particularly competitive team. The league, now they may be wrong because this is the NFL and we see what happens in the NFL. Teams that we think are going to be bad aren't. Teams that we think that are going to be good aren't. So this has to play out, but at least the guys in New York who put this schedule together believe that the Rams are not going to be a competitive team, and you can tell by the fact that they're in that early window 5 times a year after only being in it once the year before.
Yeah, and I think that's something that really is striking about this schedule is just one, the Eastern time zone games, the early window games. Like you mentioned, they played a total of 5 games in the early window with a 10 a.m. start. That says a lot about how this league feels about the 2023 Rams and them as a draw, them as a potential contender. They had 1 last season. They had 4 in 2021. This year they played 5, the Colts, Cowboys, Packers, Ravens, and Giants. And those are all teams that you can see as possible Sunday night football games in previous years. Instead, you have them in the early window. Last year they played just 1, and that was against Tampa Bay, so it's not like it was in a cold climate. And then you look at those cold games too. That's another thing I look at as a Rams team that plays in sunshine in Los Angeles. In November, they have road trips to Green Bay, Baltimore, and New Jersey. Hopefully they turn up the heater there in Green Bay. It kind of reminds me of that scene in Cool Runnings when they're all out in the cold there. So hopefully they stay warm. But look, on my show for the Dodgers Nation postgame show, sometimes they call me Dougie Downer when I get too negative, right? I want to say some positive things about the schedule. One thing I do like, Travis, is the bye week in week 10. It falls in mid-November. Last year it fell in week 17, and with all the injuries, it definitely did help. But coming off 2 road games against Dallas and Green Bay, I like the bye week. Also, the back half of the schedule, you only face 3 2022 playoff game teams in the final 8 games of the year, the Seahawks, Giants, and 49ers. Is there anything that you do like about this schedule, the way it lines up, and actually helping this team win if they can win 8 or 9 games?
Here's what I like the most, that Locked On Rams has had both a Street Fighter and Cool Runnings mention in the first segment. This is my new favorite thing that we got going here. I'm very, very happy about both of those things. You mentioned it, Doug. I think one of the things that I prefer, and I don't know if it's just because I'm covering these games and I kind of like to hold on to these things a little bit, I like a late bye. I think a late bye is better. You hear NFL teams, you'll take it whenever you can get it. There's no bad time to get a bye, but I like a bye a little bit later in the season as opposed to a little bit earlier. The fact that they get it when they get it, week 10, I think is going to serve them pretty well. Just to kind of, it's not quite the halfway point, but it's close enough. You can kind of catch your breath, get as healthy as you can, and kind of maybe even reassess where you are as a team. You mentioned they had it week 7 last year, which feels a little bit early, and all of a sudden you got to turn around. You got to play 10, 11 weeks in in a row, and the season was already starting to point in a certain direction. I like that bye being a little later than a little earlier, and I think they got lucky there.
Yeah, I think they definitely got lucky with the bye. And it just, if you look at the schedule in the first part of it, really you got the Colts, the Cardinals, the Packers, and maybe another one there in the first 9 would be a nice win. The Seahawks in week 1, we know McVay has had a lot of success, 8-5 career against Pete Carroll. Really should have swept them last year. But most of these games, you're not expecting them to win. So they have to win the ones they're expected to win, kind of win some of those toss-up games, and hopefully steal one where they're the underdogs. That's going to be a tough task, but that really is going to be the only way you can put together a respectable record. But next on Locked On Rams, we're going to talk about the lack of primetime games. Just 2 primetime games for your Los Angeles Rams. Did they get disrespected? Should they have played more? That's coming up on Locked On Rams.
But first, D-Mac, let's talk a little bit about Built Bar. We're both always looking for that delicious snack, but you want to make a good choice, right? You can't always be eating like you're 18 years old. You got to make a good choice here and there. Why not find the best tasting protein bar ever? Built. You got to give it a shot. If you're like me, you want to make that better choice, but you don't want to compromise on taste, right? We want to eat things that taste good. This is the thing for you. Built Bars and Built Puffs. Built Bars are healthy and they taste amazing. How do they taste amazing, right? Well, covered in 100% real chocolate. That's right, 100% real chocolate. Great flavors, churro, peanut butter brownie, cookies and cream. My favorite, of course, is the coconut almond. And I don't know how they do it. Really not my problem to figure it out, but they taste like a candy bar while maintaining amazing macros. And what's better, they genuinely are good for you. We're talking only 130 calories, only 4 grams of sugar with an unbelievable whopping 17 grams of protein. And right now, you don't even need to wait to get the box. For years, we've been talking about ordering Built Bars at Built.com, but now you can get them at your local Walmart or Sam's Club, while you can still get your specialty flavors at Built.com. So if you're close to a Sam's Club, run on in and grab a 13-bar box with our hit flavors, Brownie Batter Puff, Churro Puff, find those coconut almond ones too, and you can thank me later.
And welcome back to Locked On Rams, and shout out to our everydayers who rock with us every single day. Thank you for making Locked On Rams your first listen every single day, free and available wherever you get your podcasts. And we're also available over on YouTube. So go check us out on YouTube, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, and drop all your Ram takes down below. But Travis, this is a topic I'm very excited to get into because we made some very compelling cases for a lot of these games to be featured on primetime. And the Rams, they got just 2 primetime games, their fewest since 2017. The Rams will play the Bengals on Monday Night Football in week 3, a rematch of Super Bowl 56. And then they also play the New Orleans Saints. We did not see this one coming on Thursday Night Football on December 21st, so it's later in the year. LA's played 26 primetime games in the last 5 seasons. Now, what is your takeaway on the fact that you're only getting 2 primetime games this year for the Rams, Trav?
So we were talking about this on my my ESPN talk show, Travis and Sliwa, and we kind of set the over-under on primetime games at 2.5. I thought that they were going to get 2 or 3. I thought that was kind of the spot where it was going to land, and they went under with just the 2, like you mentioned. I think there's a couple of things here. Number one, you mentioned a second ago, that the New Orleans Saints is one of those games I think is the big upset right there. The good news is we're going to get a little crossover edition with Ross Jackson from Locked On Saints when he comes on. So I look forward to talking to our guy, Ross. That's always a good day. But the Saints are, the NFC South is kind of a weird division. I don't know if there is a favorite in that division. It feels like everybody's kind of equally mediocre in that division. The Rams are not probably one of the top 2 teams in the NFC West coming into the season. That was a game that they decided to put in prime time was a little bit surprising. I'm not surprised that they wanted a primetime game with SoFi Stadium. Maybe the Chargers are going to fill some of that bill as well. But that game late in the season too, that could be a game between the 2 teams that are well out of the playoff picture, potentially. We'll see how it plays out. The other one, you called it, and Joe Burrow is a big draw. You're talking about those dynamic wide receivers like Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, the guys that you mentioned. That's a really good team. I think that's a good game for the Rams because, like you mentioned, early in the season, the Rams will still be, I think, hopefully everybody in the league still relatively healthy at that point. You're going to see best on best. You're going to get to see that Super Bowl rematch. And if you're going to go to Cincinnati, September's not a bad time to do it. That's probably the best time to go to that part of the country as far as weather is concerned. And the fact that the Rams only got those 2 primetime games, I think kind of speaks to what we were talking about earlier. And similar to getting 10 early or 5 games in that early 10 o'clock window, this is a team that the people that put the schedules together do not expect to be terribly competitive. That this is last year, they were in 6 games where they were the only game on TV. 6 different times they were the only NFL game being played. They're only getting 2 this year, and I think that's a direct reflection of what the league expects out of this team this year.
Yeah, no, I think, look, you were definitely on it when you pretty much predicted that you didn't anticipate a lot of primetime games. But when you look at the Chargers, they're getting 6. They're kind of like the evil stepchild here in LA when it comes to LA football franchises. And you look at this Rams team, they won a Super Bowl just a few years ago. If they didn't have the talent, if they had traded away Matthew Stafford or Cooper Kupp or Aaron Donald, then I get it. But last year, what was the talk of the NFL? The offense was actually down. The passing was actually down, and you still have an explosive offense potential. Look, if the Rams win games, it's going to be because they're scoring a lot of points, and we know this offense is very capable to have a high-octane offense, and I'm just surprised you didn't at least see one more. Maybe the Eagles, maybe the Cowboys, maybe one of the division games like the Seahawks or the 49ers. I'm shocked they got only 2 primetime games. Is the NFL not enamored with LA anymore? I mean, they have this SoFi Stadium, this football cathedral that they love to show off. We talked about all the B-roll shots where they're coming off after the break. I think you still want to further establish the fact that the Rams are the team in LA, but maybe the NFL says, okay, this is the Chargers' turn. Maybe this is when we showcase the Chargers this season. But I think if you're in this city, you realize that it's a Rams town when it comes to who is the LA football team in this town. So I'm surprised that they didn't get at least just one more. I'll also say, too, I've seen a lot of people out there saying, oh, they can always flex their way into one game. I'll tell you right now, it is not a very good chance. There's not a good chance that they're going to be flexing in maybe that 49ers game late if they're in the hunt, if they surprise in the division. I think there's a possibility, but the odds of getting a flex game are very unlikely. Wouldn't you say, Trav?
I think it's very, very unlikely. I think there's a couple of things going on. Good luck to the NFL showcasing the Chargers. Anybody that has followed the Chargers since their inception, really, go ahead and count on them doing the thing you think you're going to do. How's that worked out for you over the last 50 years? Good luck with that. The second part is there are some teams that never got, I shouldn't say never, but rarely got primetime attention that are getting a ton this year, namely Aaron Rodgers and the New York Jets. The Jets would get a Monday night here. They might show up on a Thursday, but the Jets have been a bad team for a very long time. And quite frankly, not even an interesting bad team, the way the Cowboys could sometimes be interesting bad, the way that sometimes those popular teams in places that have a lot of fans are invested anyway. The Jets have 6 too. The Jets will get 6 different primetime games. So when you talk about the Chargers getting a bunch, you talk about the Jets getting a bunch, you tell the Cowboys are always going to get a lot. The Eagles are the defending NFC champion. You're going to put the Chiefs in primetime a lot. There's just not a lot of real estate left to put in a team that went 5-12 the year before. So I think it's as much that other people have kind of jumped into those slots as it is that the Rams just aren't expected to be very good.
Yeah, so let's hope the Rams use it as fuel or as motivation if you're someone who wants to see the Rams compete this season. But I still think if you look at this team, yes, Aaron Rodgers, yes, the Jets, we know they're marketable. We know the Chargers, they have a lot of talent. But those are 2 teams that, for whatever reason, they tend to disappoint no matter who's on their roster. So I think, yeah, LA, I still think they should have given them at least one. Maybe I'll take one more. I think the Eagles was the one that I wanted to see as a Sunday night football game because it was still early in the season, and you couldn't say, like, oh, the Rams season's over. You can still say you have the Super Bowl. You have the teams that were in the Super Bowl last couple of years, like 2 of the perennial powers in the NFC. So that's the one I wanted to see. But on our last segment here, Rams CEO Kevin Demoff, he wasn't happy with the Rams schedule. We're going to talk about that. And does this difficult schedule actually help what the Rams are trying to accomplish in 2023? That's coming up on Locked On Rams. And welcome back to Locked On Rams, and a special shout out to our everyday listeners. Thank you for making Locked On Rams your first listen every single day, free and available wherever you get your podcasts. And we're also available on YouTube, so be sure to check us out over on YouTube. Hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, drop those comments down below. And a special preview on Monday, we're starting a series where we're breaking down the schedule for the NFC West. We're going to focus on the NFC West on Monday. You won't want to miss that. But Travis, final segment here is about the schedule and how Kevin Demoff, he was not a fan of the the fact that the Rams, they are playing in Green Bay for the 4th time in consecutive years. He told the LA Times, it's still disappointing to me. That's one I thought they should have honored. Now, the Rams, they will be making a trip to Lambeau once again, and this time it's on November 5th. We know last year it was one of the coldest games in NFL history. It was 14 degrees with a 10-mile-per-hour wind chill. The low was at 3 degrees. But what's your take on the Rams playing the Packers once again for another season?
Yeah, it's one of those weird quirks of the NFL schedule where obviously it rotates the other divisions that you're playing. The Rams have played the Green Bay Packers in the postseason in that window that we're talking about, and you play the team that won the AFC, one from the NFC, that is a fellow first place team or second place team or wherever you land. And the Packers and the Rams have just been on that same level for a very long period of time. So it's a little bit just of a quirk like that. I understand what Kevin Demoff is getting at, that he wanted to play that game maybe earlier in the season, considering that when they have played at Lambeau, it's always been late. I'll go back to the late 90s. The only time I've ever been to Lambeau Field was the NFC Championship game between the Green Bay Packers and the Carolina Panthers. And it was 8 degrees there, and I thought I was going to die. I grew up here in LA. I have never experienced anything like that in my life, and keeping your feet in the snow and your butt in the snow and all these things. It is an absolutely miserable experience. Fun to do it once, but to Kevin Demoff's point, to have to go do it year after year after year, there is a little bit of a disadvantage if you're an LA team, you're an indoor team, the way that the Rams are, that they're getting sent there again is now. The good news, I guess, is that Aaron Rodgers isn't there. Who knows if Jordan Love is an impact player or not. We will certainly have a pretty good idea of whether he is or isn't by the time that game rolls around. So it's a little bit of a different animal. But anytime you go to Green Bay past Halloween, cross your fingers and hope that it's not so bad.
Yeah, no, I think you bring up a good point that at least this is not going to be a good Green Bay Packers team. It's not like you're facing a team with Aaron Rodgers, a team that has Super Bowl aspirations. And look, the reality is in 2020, that was a playoff game. That was a divisional round game. They couldn't control that. They lost to them in November 2021. They lost to them last December in Monday Night Football. But like you said, it's just a scheduling quirk. It's not like there's this big conspiracy against the LA Rams or anything like that to make them go play in Green Bay. It's just how the cookie crumbled this year with the scheduling formula. Look, when you play every 3 years, you play an NFC division that rotates home and away, and that's just the reality of the situation. Also, too, you play the same place, finish your games. 2023, you're going to be playing at Green Bay. And in 2024, the Rams, they're going to play all the NFC North, including Green Bay, which will be at SoFi Stadium. And then in 2025 and 2026, Green Bay and the Rams, they finish in the same spot. Those games will be in Los Angeles. I don't think a lot of fans realize that. It is a scheduling quirk, but I am with you. I don't do cold weather either, my man. I don't care. I mean, I look like I'm going on some rescue mission in Alaska if it's 40 degrees here, man. I don't do the cold weather.
But the beers in the car so they don't freeze during a tailgate thing. Think about that, Doug. For our entire life, we've tried to figure out a way to keep the beer cold longer. They're trying to find a way to prevent it from freezing so they can still drink it. It's a different way of life for sure.
Insane, man. Hey, that bratwurst looks like it's fire, though. I'll definitely go for some bratwurst and one of those cheese heads. But yeah, I also want to touch on this, though. I mean, we talked about it a little at the beginning of the show. The fact that you look at the way the schedule is lined up. I mean, back-to-back NFC West rivals to start the year. And you look at just the way the schedule is lined up. I mean, there's a good chance that this season could get away from the Rams early. And yes, there's some things that are favorable, but for the most part, it is a gauntlet early on. In any way, do you think that for what the Rams are looking forward to, I told you early in the show, I think you're going to see on Twitter later in the year, a lot of people tweeting, Caleb Williams, you are a Ram. I mean, you look at the back half of the schedule, do you think it lines up for their future goals?
So I think it's really interesting. I think that, look, there's what they say, which is we're not tanking. We're not, getting together. We're not putting together a plan for a future year. They're going to try to remain competitive. That's fine. And that could be true. Or you can look at what they're doing. And what they're doing is they basically sat out free agency. What they're doing is they didn't go even and sign any of their own players. They finally have a full plethora of draft picks coming up for the 2024 draft. And they seem to be in a mode where it's kind of a wait and see. Like we talked about, the beginning of this schedule is tough. Through the first 9 games, there could be a win, maybe 2. To think that you're going to get 4 wins out of those first 9 games, That's being pretty audacious. Now, you might be in a position to get that high draft pick. You might be in a position to start looking at Caleb Williams in a real meaningful way, as opposed to just kind of pie in the sky if everything breaks right. Here's where it gets tricky. The back end of the schedule has some very winnable games. Now, again, nobody knows anything at this point, but if we're kind of right, Arizona is a game that they always play pretty well in, that Sean McVay has the Cardinals number. You look at a team like Cleveland, who historically is kind of all over the map, usually bad, so we'll see what that looks like. You got the Commanders, good luck right there. And then you got that New Orleans Saints that we're talking about. They might be good, they might be average, they might be bad. The last thing that you would want at this, if the first half of the season goes the way that we think it will, where they win a game or two or three, and all of a sudden you are looking at a top 2 or 3 year pick, right? And now all of a sudden you grab 3 or 4 wins towards the end of the season and you go from a 3-win team to a 7-win team. Well, that pick goes from 1, 2, or 3 to 13 or 14. That's bad news. 13 or 14 is not where you want to be. You want to be near the top of that. So I'm not saying tank. I'm not saying rebuild. I'm not saying any of these things. I'm just saying being very aware of where you are and what your goals are long term when you get to that last month or so of the season.
Yeah, and I know we're not supposed to use profanity on this show, and I don't like to use the T word, but it could be in tank mode late in the year if they're that close. Now, I do think that the way that this organization is heading with the stars in place, I think they're looking more at the available cap space than draft capital for the 2024 season. I think the draft capital definitely will come with the territory and be a way to spin a positive on the season, but I still think it's going to be about the cap space. But look, I think it's going to be enticing, especially if you see Caleb Williams maybe winning his second Heisman at USC and it's kind of lining up. I think it's easier to sell on the fan base. But look, the reality is the stronger your division, the stronger your strength of schedule. And look, that's why the NFC South, they have the weakest strength of schedule. I mean, you can complain all you want about it, but if your division's strong, you're going to have a strong schedule no matter what. But yeah, I do think there is a possibility you'll see this season just spiraling into abyss early with a 1-4 start. But my hope that I'm grasping onto is that the offense, they look the part. They're scoring points, and they're scoring 30, 40 points a game, and they're going off, and they're keeping this in they're keeping the Rams in games early on, and hopefully they can steal some wins. But yeah, I just want to make it clear, the league office, they have nothing to do with the strength of schedule. It's based on the previous year's team's records, and yeah, you take all the wins and losses from the upcoming opponents, and it's really just predetermined at that point. But yeah, it'll be very interesting to see how they navigate this schedule early on and if they're able to have some wins, because we're going to know what this season is going to look like 5 games into the season. I mean, that's just the reality. Wouldn't you agree with that?
I think so. I think you look at those first 5 games and, you know, you mentioned it. They're traditionally pretty strong against Seattle. The Rams are traditionally pretty fast starters when it comes to this. Last year's Bills game being the exception to the rule. But that's a big ask. I mean, you're talking about a team that was in the Super Bowl a couple of years ago in Cincinnati, a team that was in the Super Bowl last year in Philadelphia. You're talking about a San Francisco team that's the exact opposite of a good matchup. And then you got to go on the road to an Indy team that might not be great, but you're on the road in the Eastern time zone, and that creates its own problems. It's a very, very tough opener.
Yeah, it's like, would you rather be run over by a bus or an 18-wheeler? I mean, the competition is so stiff early on. But that's going to do it for this episode of Locked on Rams. My name is Doug McCain. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at DMac_LA. And to your left, he is that man, Mr. Travis Rogers. Go follow him on Twitter at Travis Rogers. Drop a comment down below about your season predictions. How do you feel about the Rams schedule? Let us know down below. And until next time, whose house is Locked on Rams house?